Michael Laufer from the Thieves Vinegar Collective here. I'm here in Stockholm. Has a fascinating history of medicine, socialized medicine specifically, and medicine related to gender. We were invited to come and tour Scandinavia to talk about some of the ideas we've developed and hijacked over the years that might be applicable to some of the problems that they're facing these days. So, I hope you'll join me as we go through Sweden and Denmark to share some of the ideas we've developed and some of the tools we've managed to hijack. Sweden has a fascinating history, especially surrounding health. It's amazing to come here and talk with locals who talk about the health system as though there's a problem. Coming from the United States, we always talk about Sweden as this utopia. And some of the locals view it very differently. In the US, Stockholm is kind of a code word for gender reassignment surgery. Sweden was the first place to allow gender change to be done legally.
This is so beautiful.
And for a long time, it was a mecca for trans people to come for surgery. So it came as kind of a surprise to me when a local told me that up until 2013, if you came out as trans in Sweden, you were forcibly sterilized. And we checked the facts. The fascinating thing is that it turns out both are true. Sweden was the first place to allow legal gender change. However, it did require what they saw as a full surgery, so you were sterilized in the process. Interesting to chat about these types of things and see it from both perspectives. Currently, there's been a swing right in the political climate here, and getting hormone replacement therapy chemically has become harder and harder. One of the things that we were asked to talk about is how to support comrades in war zones overseas. Now, at first blush, this might not seem something that's related to what Thieves does. But interestingly enough, in war zones, the main cause of death is chronic, non-communicable disease. Things like heart failure, kidney failure, and diabetes. So how do we get those medicines to the people who need them? When solving both of these problems, you run into a spectrum of potential options. In one case, you can merely take pre-prepared medicines and then transport them from point A to point B. As an intermediate option, you can get the active pharmaceutical ingredients in and then compound things on site. In the last case, you can do the chemistry on site and make the medicines from scratch. But it's always a trade-off between logistics and chemistry. We'll try and work on some of these and find the most efficient option for each. Let's take a look at some of them. Michael?
You're doing fine.
I do drugs stuff, pharmaceuticals. When I'm talking with normies, I say that I do human rights and global health, which is true. The methodology of Thieves, which is the group that I represent, is to try and get medicines and medical technologies to people who need them but don't have them. And we are agnostic as to how to do that, as in, like, you know, respect for like laws and borders and shit like that. We try and get it done, however is possible. So that's already why I'm talking about the DIY thing. Because, as you all know, trying to supplant the pharmaceutical industry with a different infrastructure is going to do nobody any favors. The whole key typically is to try and develop methodologies by which people can do this without a need of support of infrastructure or other people. How am I doing?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
My pleasure, thank you. So historically speaking, we've done this with a number of things. Typically, we do it with HIV medications, hepatitis medications. We're big on abortion drugs. Additionally, we also do a lot of work with naloxone, Narcan. Those are sort of our main four things that we focus on. But as you all know, access to HRT has become a big deal. And the same thing happens with pharmaceuticals. It's very weird because it's so easy to walk up to the pharmacy and give them a piece of paper and they hand you some pills, and because they look like pills, we're like, oh, it must be fine. But when things are in slick packaging, it should arouse our suspicions and not suppress them. It looks pretty. That doesn't mean it's safe. You don't get to go behind the counter at the pharmacy and check to see if they got you the right pills. You don't get to see if they stored them correctly. You don't get to see if they were shipped correctly, and you certainly don't get to go back to the factory and see if they were manufactured correctly. One of the biggest hurdles I find with people who are trying to get into manufacture of pharmaceuticals of whatever type is getting over this fear of like, what if I do it wrong? It's like, you'll know because you're there. And then, yeah, maybe you ruin a batch and you start over, but it's fine. That's part of the process. That's not a failure. That's part of the process. That is the road to success. So I urge you all to think about that if you're considering this. When it seems safer to take something that somebody hands you, and remember that there is this tremendous article of faith in an institution that, let's be serious, doesn't really give much of a fuck about you.
Take it apart slowly, so like it's also like extended release. So releases
changes your metabolism.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, if you have all the bits and pieces, all you need is a scale. There are a couple of different ways to do this. Now, the safest and most labor-intensive way is you measure out the dose for every single pill. Put it in a gel cap. Put it in the bowl. It takes a long time, but the benefit is that you, again, have perfect surveillance over every single thing. Whenever you talk to like somebody from the pharmaceutical industry and you start talking about like doing stuff off the books, the first thing that they ask, how are you going to do quality control? How are you going to do quality control? Quality control doesn't have to be a problem if you're making things one at a time. One of the things that we did at one point was we were making abortion tablets, and it's like, you don't have to worry about it because you actually dose every tablet one at a time. You know exactly how much went in there. So that's the easiest way. Now, if you're trying to make them by the 1,000, it gets a little harder because you're going to have to mix in buffer and binder, and you're going to have to mix it in such a way so that you know it's homogeneous. Now, the best way to do this is to get powdered vegetable dye. You know, just pick your favorite color, and you throw it in. And then what happens is as you like run it through the sieve and mix it again and run it through the sieve and mix it again, you can visually see that that colored stuff is dispersed well enough that you know that all of the various things are dispersed well enough. And then you can do any number of things where you can have those grids where you will lay out half capsules and then just dump it in and it'll pre-measure. Alternatively, if you want to go like a super hardcore route, you can get a tablet press. Tablet presses vary in their price. There are ones you can get for $10 where you do them one at a time, where you put it in, you like literally just hit it with a hammer until the powder compresses. Or you can spend $1,000 for a hand crank one that'll just like kick out pills, and you know, you can get custom dyes that put happy faces on it or whatever. But yeah, if you have the materials, it's just a matter of measuring. And yeah, do it bespoke, and it'll be super safe. It's really good when you substitute time and care for money. You get better things. And that's one of the things that I like most about DIY medicine. You get better. Like, it's just better stuff, and you know, and you don't have to worry. So yeah, in the case of that, that's one of the important lessons here is that the technology is already on the shelf. You don't have to invent anything. It already exists. You just need to hijack it. And you can hijack it in any number of ways. The like hardcore hijacking is you find out where the manufacturing is going on and you just get one of those bacteria. And just one, right? It's like data. Once you have one, you can make as many as you want, and that's the magic of it. And also, once you have some, you can make some for everybody you know, and so can they. And it becomes like a torrent, right? Except it's biomaterials. Sometimes that's not super accessible, and you don't want to do a caper and break into some lab, as fun as that sounds. The other thing that you can do is if you have somebody who has experience in synthetic biology, you know, somebody who's a grad student and they're sick of being abused by their advisor, and you're like, hey, want to do a project on the side, right? You'd be surprised how often people say yes, you know. they just want to do anything that's not like being abused. Surprise. It's not that difficult, and the instructions exist because every one of these fucking things is patented because of the, horrors of intellectual property law. The one saving grace is that you have to put a phenomenal amount of detail into your patent or it doesn't get granted. So typically, the vector that you use to infect your microorganism is going to be written down, and you can just go up to somebody who knows how to do this and be like, can we do this? Now, proviso, the hard part is finding a biologist who specializes in the particular thing that you're working with. It's a very weird thing, and I learned this the hard way, but most of the information that is in humanity about how to do biology as a science is not written down anywhere. I don't know if you all knew this before I did, but this came as a rather shock because you kind of think of science as a practice of documenting things, but somehow this is not the case at all. What happens is, in the journal, you write down kind of what you did and kind of how you got there, and you leave out all the gobbledygook about all the work that you had to do to like kick the machine just this way, or you poke the bacteria just like that, and nobody wants to fucking hear it. So you just keep it to yourself. It's in your notebook, and then when the next poor grad student comes in as you're graduating, you kind of be like, oh yeah, remember to kick the machine this way and poke the bacteria that way. It's just an oral tradition. Like, I see somebody nodding. Like, I'm gonna bet like 8-3 that somebody maybe worked in a lab. Yeah, maybe. Okay. So this is interesting because I had a project in synthetic biology that was like deadlocked for 4 years with somebody who was like, yeah, I don't know why it's not working. And then I got somebody who had worked with this specific bacteria, and they were like, oh yeah, that part's wrong. And I was like, well, why didn't anybody know that? It's like, well, nobody knows that. It's like, well, how do you know that? It's like, well, I did my postdoc on that. I wrote my thesis on that bacteria. So, just a word to the wise, if you pick up a paper or a patent that talks about synthetic biology or biology in general, and you're trying to replicate something, make sure you have somebody who's not going to be struggling through it. And like, I spent a really long time with a poor guy who's a protein engineer, trying to get him to do, vector bacteria. It was terrible. I feel terrible. I was just like, biology, it's the same, right? Like, I should have known. But so, for those of you who like plants, there's another way, which is you can induce plants to manufacture your hormones for you. And the magic here is that you don't really have to do a whole lot because they already do it on their own. If you look, and I have this wonderful graphic of the way that plants, there are several different plants that manufacture testosterone on their own, which is pretty wild. It's in tiny amounts, and so you need a huge amount to extract it. It's doable, but it's hard. But you can engineer that metabolism and push it. But the really cool part is when you look at the metabolic pathway, it's a nightmare. It's this giant thing. And if you were doing it synthetically in a chemistry lab, you'd be there a year. But the plants don't even have to think about it. It's already built in. And so all you have to do is just kick it a little harder. And again, the work's been done for you. This is not like some new idea. One of the things at For Thieves, like, we don't invent. We just hijack. But there's so much to hijack because this shit is sitting on the shelf and nobody's using it. And this is the thing that like makes my bile duct rage. We have all the medicine. And it says something so tragic about the state of humanity when we spend all of these time and all of these resources developing these wonderful medicines that can solve so many problems and then refuse to deliver them to the people who need them. And so, I mean, that's kind of what drives me through all of this. And so looking for what's on the shelf is an important tool because you will be surprised. You have an idea for a moment and you think, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if somebody probably thought of it? Now, of course, how far did they go with it? Was it just something that happened in a petri dish? Or maybe it happened one time as a fluke in rats? Or maybe
There's a whole other medicine that's out there. There are whole ecosystems of drugs, and I shit you not, like incredible drugs that you will never be able to get because they did not pass the approval process, not because they were dangerous, not because they were ineffective, but either A, they were not more effective than the one that's currently on the market and leading the market, or it's very, very effective, but only in a small cross-section of the population. If you have something that's a miracle drug for 20% of the population and does nothing for the rest, that will never be approved, which means you can never get it. And that miracle drug for that swath of people is just gone. But if you dig, you can find these. They're out there. There is a syndrome called aromatase excess syndrome. And this is this interesting phenomenon where, and it's a genetic disorder where your body produces an unusually high amount of a particular enzyme. And this enzyme will turn testosterone into estrogen. I just got a really good smile from somebody. I'm not going to point them out, but the person who just smiled at me, you made my fucking day. Because there are any number of us here who would love to be able to turn some or most of our testosterone into estrogen. And one of the things that's really cool about this is that unlike traditional HRT, where you're putting hormones into your body that weren't there and then your body gets disoriented and fights it because it feels like its endocrine set point is in a different place, you just say, no, the set point's over here. How about we do that? And then your body can do it by itself. Now, this isn't science fiction, right? This is a disease. And it's a genetic one, which means it's coded by a gene, which means you can induce it via a gene therapy. And this has not been done in humans yet. But these methodologies have been tried, and there are ways that you can hijack the salivary glands in humans, or any other mammal for that matter, and generate enzyme of your choice or hormone of your choice. And all you need is a little piece of DNA. And again, there are academic papers on this. Nobody's ever just really connected the dots and said, well, why don't we do this on purpose? And I don't know, some people like needles. Some people like enjoying their medicine. Some people would like to do it once and not have to think about it ever again for the rest of their lives. And I think that would be pretty dope. So that's like the super hard way. And again, I have documentation for this for anybody who's interested in that sort of thing. There are two ways to get around the bulk pricing thing. Oftentimes, you can, like it is like an industry standard that if you find a source for any chemical, that you can buy a sample for testing. And that might be all that you need. But it's a very standard thing, right? Because again, even within the industry, you don't trust, you verify. And so it's a very standard thing to say, like, we need to see some of what you've got before we buy, 800 kilos of it. And they will send you a small amount for a fee. Additionally, if you go to any of the sort of web crawler services that look for chemicals like Chemispider or ChemCrawler, any of those, each one of the vendors will have a minimum amount. And oftentimes it's 100 grams. It's especially for things that are potent in small doses like hormones, because they know you're not going to be needing large amounts of it. That said, even there, when you're buying estrogen, you can get like 500 grams for, and that's considered like a proper large purchase for like $1,100 US, which again, it's not nothing, but it's not the end of the world, especially if you're doing it with a group of people. The hard line to our server was cut 2 weeks ago, we did manage to repair that. It's unclear who did that or why. Shortly after that, the motherboard on our server got burnt. And again, it's not clear how that happened. Probably coincidence, but who knows? That to say, our website is currently down. The server is being rebuilt by the hardware people. It will hopefully be up. Where did you go? Oh, hi. Once things have evolved to the point where we've documented them well enough that we can release it and say, like, here's a complete guide that you don't need to talk to anybody and you can just use, we will upload things. Additionally, I do sort of short form videos with some regularity. Again, those are on our website because YouTube takes them down immediately. We try to mirror those on the Internet Archive, although they took some of our shit down not too long ago, and I was really displeased. But when I raised the fuss, they put it back, or at least some of it. So it's out there. forthievesvinegar.org. We're around, and many of my older talks are still on YouTube, and some of them have been taken down, but because they were through other organizations that don't self-describe as terrorists, like, you know, they leave them up. A lot of the stuff that I just talked about is still in process, so this isn't stuff that we have, like, strong, strict protocols for. It's so funny that you mentioned this, because I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this very recently. A friend of mine named Deviant Olm just made a wonderful video about preparedness. Very long, but worth watching, where he talks about locksmith, lawyer, passport, gun. And basically his premise is, here are 4 things that are not particularly special, but if you need one, it's too late to go and get it. So be prepared. There's one little glitch with his talk, though, because a lot of what he talks about is exactly what you're describing, right? Having a community of people, having a lot of mutual support, having a trusted network, being able to have people who will jump in and take care of things when you can. And he has that because he's like the most lovable guy in the universe. Like, you hang out with this guy, and the only thing that's irritating about him is, like, at least to me, is I'm like, I sit with this guy and I go, fuck, you know, I could be a better person. Screw you. You know, he's just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. Like, in every way, just like, it boggles the mind. So, of course, he's probably got 1,000 people in his phone. But how do you get that? Trying to find allies is not trivial, especially with the cloak of deceit that social media sells you, that you will find your people, when it's designed to do rather the opposite. And it's so disappointing because you know they're there, but somehow, like, things just never quite connect. The only thing that I know how to do, or that I've ever seen work, is that you start just by making noise about the thing about which you're passionate, and you invite people to hang out. I knew a guy who used to throw parties. The only reason he threw parties is because he wasn't making friends, and he just decided he was going to throw the sorts of parties that he would want to go to, and he figured people he would like would show up, and it worked very effectively. So in a similar way, if you start being kind of public about whatever you're doing or whatever you're into, you can, you know, people will show up, and it's a long, slow process. But for me, I think the phrase that I utter more than any other in life is, can you introduce me? Somebody says, oh, I heard of blah, blah, blah. You'd be really interested in, can you introduce me? Can you introduce me? Can you introduce me? I say this all the time. And, you know, plenty of times, like, well, I don't know them. Like, Do you know somebody who knows them? You introduce me? And from that, you quickly find that your people are out there. I think a lot of people are under the illusion that maybe their people aren't. But they are. They have to be. There's no way there aren't. Hard to find. Yeah, sure. Cool. And for people who are like, oh, I'm not a people person, I don't like, that's not true. You just don't like shitty people. Okay? And that's the reality. Like, none of us do. Trying to find people who gel with our own personal weirdness is difficult. That's the best trick I know. And eventually, you'll develop filters where you'll know pretty quickly if somebody is one of you or not, and you can kind of be like, oh, okay, cool to meet you. I'm like, I'll buy you a drink sometime, but like, cool. And that's part of the reason I'm so obnoxious, right? Because it's a really great filter. If I say hi, like I'm a bioterrorist, like, cool people are going to be like, cool, what'd you do lately? I'm like, all right, I'm buying. And then, normies will be like, what? Sorry, I have another appointment. You can bail. Whatever your version of that is, just take the thing that you like about yourself and just crank it up and just be like, hi. And you'll know. And then, you just run that cycle. I mean, I don't want to be too like maudlin about it, but like it's a lifelong process. You're never going to stop trying to find more people that are closer to the way that you operate. Don't ever give up. I've been trying to find my people forever. And every so often I find another one, and it is the best thing. And you can hang out in a target-rich environment where you are more likely to find people who get it. And events are really great for that. But literally, I met a guy a year ago who's become, somebody I work with more closely than most of the rest of all the people I work with. And it was total chance. Just some guy. And, it's worth looking. So, I think that's a good note to end on. So I'll say this. Your people are out there. They want to meet you. Find them. Take care of them. Love them. And introduce me. Thank you all so much. And I'll be around. Like, do not hesitate to come say hi. If you have an extra smoke, I'd love it.
We don't need Mike, we need y'all. My style goes down. My style goes down.
Today we're here in Gothenburg, Sweden. And right over here is an amazing building that has a deep and long history of housing activists, anarchists, and people fighting the system. Behind me you can see the building where people for the last 40 years have been resisting all forms of oppression. At one point it was a school, at another point a squat, and a center for organizing. And we're honored enough to come in and have a conversation about some of the things that Four Thieves is doing. Let's go inside and we'll have a chat with some interesting people. The criticisms attempt to come from people who object to either the fact that we just reject sort of profit-based economic structures, or they tend to be just offended by the fact that we're opening up what is normally sort of a closed shop, right? They don't like, people who have degrees in pharmacy or chemistry will often say, like, that's not that easy. You shouldn't be doing that. That's not safe. And it's again this sort of like the threat, to use your word, that they feel is much more one of, they feel invalidated, right? It's like, they wasted their 20s getting a PhD. And like, I empathize. I wasted my 20s getting a PhD. And it was, it was really stupid. I should have done something better. But it's easy for me to say that because I walked away, right? And for people who are still emotionally invested in that, whether that's their career or they just wish it had been their career, for somebody to step in and say, it's really not that hard. Come on, let's not shit ourselves. Not that hard. That's very threatening, right? But simultaneously, what's fascinating to me is that some of the criticisms that come up when they say, when they're specific, a couple of these people who have some knowledge of chemistry, pharmaceutical science, will raise objections and say, XYZ is very difficult, often. And the fascinating part to me is that in a lot of cases that's very true, and that's why we work on it. And it's just kind of dumb. We could have had a nice conversation and said, like, why don't you just come work with us? Yeah, this is a hard problem. And if you really know more about it than we do, we'd love your help, as opposed to you just like being angry, saying that we shouldn't. So it's interesting to see an overlap. I think that to try and circle back to the essence of your question, I think the substance in those criticisms is often not, founded on something, but misplaced, right? They will point out things that are true in sort of a, scientific or infrastructural sense of like, oh, this is hard to work with, or this is an unstable thing, or this is a difficult transformation, or you don't have these systems in a laboratory. How would you do that? These are all valid questions to which we do have answers. And if they decided to have a conversation, we can give those answers. It's not out of nowhere. Some of the people, of course, are just angry and they're not thinking, but plenty of them, the criticisms come from somewhere. They make some sense, but often just don't apply. And a lot of the time that's because they're thinking in a format that doesn't apply. So modern chemistry, the strategy when you're trying to make a molecule is you do this very sloppy chemistry, and then you have very sophisticated machines at the end that can filter and test. And so even though most of what you made is garbage, if you have 10% that's good, you can pull that out without too much trouble because you have $500,000 worth of machinery. Now, that's fast. If you have purchased the machinery, the process is cheap and it's efficient, and you don't have to think very hard or work very hard for it. So this is standard in just about every lab. And so they will often raise the question, well, how would you do this if you don't have $500,000 in equipment? And the answer is, well,
you do know that chemistry was done before these machines existed, right? And yes, it's harder work. It takes more time, it takes more care, but if you put most of the work in on the front end and you do sort of these old school wet chemistry methods that were used, you know, even as little as 50 years ago, they still work. You know, the physicality of chemistry has not changed, will never change. The way we think about it, the tools we have, those will change. And so, you know, we've spent a lot of time sort of looking at historical methodologies as to how chemistry and pharmaceutical chemistry in particular was done some time ago, because those methods are, you know, will forever be nicely applicable. I think we're just going to kind of hang out and chat.
Yeah, maybe
if you want to come closer, there's a chair here.
Filter substance classes you specialize on, like antibiotics.
Kind of. So there are a couple that we've been trying to focus on. Specialize a little less so. I can sort of answer the reverse question, which is there are certain molecules which are very hard to do. Macromolecules, really big things. So, you know, if it's small enough that you can sort of like take the back of a bus ticket and you can draw it, like, it's probably doable. When we started, we decided that the main things we wanted to focus on were HIV drugs, hepatitis C, naloxone and other associated things associated with opioid overdoses or drug overdoses in general. And then looking at abortion drugs, because these were the things where the problem is solved, essentially, but access to the medication is a huge problem. And so to look at things, to be able to say, like, it's on the shelf, it's right there, but for some reason, it's not accessible. And the three reasons that you tend to see for lack of access or block to access is typically in third world countries or developing nations, you see just a lack of infrastructure. So things can't get there, or in a war zone, just things can't get there. Then in places where there are strange or archaic ideological barriers, sometimes there's a legality problem where they'll pass laws not based on health to block access to medication. And the one that makes me the angriest, of course, is intellectual property law just making things too expensive. And so a do-it-yourself methodology, if you make your own medicines, all of these problems kind of become moot for the most part, if you can find a clever way around it. So now we have worked in a number of other drug classes, and but we've been very successful with abortion drugs in ways to source the active ingredients and also how to compound them in ways that are easier to access and easier to move around. We've had good success with naloxone as well, and also recently with diazepam, which is very good for a couple of things that are sort of related. It can be very effective when somebody's having a seizure. Also, if somebody has sort of a bad psychedelic trip, it's an easy way to take somebody out of that pretty quickly.
or with a cocaine overdose. Oftentimes, again, diazepam's fairly easy to get in pill form, but for an intranasal spray, that's kind of difficult. However, it's with a little bit of work, you can change from one to the other. You grind up the pills, you have a little coffee filter, you pour in what is essentially high-proof vodka, and the buffer and binder are not soluble in the buffer and binder, but the active ingredient is, it drips through, and you can then just put it in a nasal spray bottle, and you're done. The hepatitis C and HIV are a little trickier because those molecules are more complicated.
This is the fourth time I'm mentioning this. And I mention this because this entire course of treatment can be made for $300 in raw materials. And I happen to have it right here. Now, who said they had a friend who was infected with hepatitis? There were a couple people. Right here? You, come up here. Keep your friend healthy. Keep them safe. Thank you so much. We should be doing this every day. I get this question a lot.
They're not quite there. They are. It's still small molecule chemistry, but these sort of fourth generation antiretrovirals for HIV, they're complicated enough that it takes some work to get there. One of the ones that we worked on for a while had 2 stereo centers. So for anybody who's not a chemistry geek, there's this concept called stereochemistry where you have a big molecule like this, and then it has 2 prongs this way. And then you have 2 other prongs coming off this way. And the interesting thing is that this molecule, if this is A and this is B, this molecule is different and does nothing, while this molecule is a miracle cure. And trying to do that at the molecular level is very hard. There's a new antiretroviral which is even more powerful than that one that we were trying to hijack, and it's not as complicated. So we're working with that. There's always this sort of luck of the draw, right? You can look at a molecule and sometimes it's just lucky. You find something that's very, very similar and it's cheap and it's easy to get and the transition is super simple. And other times it's just not. It's just an artifact of the structure of the thing. So we've done a few other things outside of those 4. Recently, we've been asked a lot about hormone replacement therapy for trans people, which is different and a little more complicated, but there are still ways around that.
Want to make HRT? Here's how you do it. Go ahead, take a picture. You want to make topical gels? It's fairly simple. You're basically mixing things. That's all. And again, we'll be releasing this so that you can download this both off the slide deck and from our website. Not complicated. You could do it in your kitchen. Here's how you do it. These are the instructions. Again, take a picture if you want. But there's not a whole lot to it. Yeah, okay, better if you don't spill things, better if you keep things clean. Yes, cool. But you're just rubbing something on your skin. On the flip side, also you need a filter. Make sure you get the right type of filter. If you get the big ones, it doesn't actually filter the bacteria out. Here's how you would make an injectable. Now, what's the difference? The difference is if you're actually bypassing your immune system's blocking system, the skin, then the possibility of infection is very real. So you have to work using sterile technique. Now you can look at what came out of that. And when you notice these bottles and the labeling, you might have the thought, this looks like it came from a factory. And the truth is, well, it did. It just happened to be a very small factory with only 2 people working in somebody's house. This is an insulin pen that's been hijacked to take estradiol instead of insulin. You can put them in the same type of vials and cartridges, and this makes it much easier to dose. One of the problems with those vials that we were making is that's a year's worth in a single vial. So you have to take just a tiny amount. And again, dosing is touchy. So looking for workarounds for all of these things. And again, none of this is what I'm talking about because I'm sure plenty of the people in this very room know about how to do this. However, and again, here's this packaging, and it's fun, right? You can put, if you're making your own drugs, you can package them however you want. You can call them whatever you want. Now, this is a picture of me and somebody else, and I'm holding in my hand a box of 100 vials, each of which are a year's worth of HRT. Now, take a moment to think about this. Making that entire box took 4 hours and cost $400, and most of that cost was the glass bottles, and that's 100 years worth of HRT. And you could do this too. But still, this isn't what I want to talk about, but I still think that's pretty dope.
A lot, people, I mean, that's the number 2 thing that we ever get asked is hormone replacement therapy, because naturally everybody's scared that the access is going to dry up, and in a lot of places it has. But the number 1 thing that we always get asked about is insulin. And so, it's come up from time to time where people are saying, well, are you going to do something about insulin? And we always say, well, the Open Insulin Projects, they're doing that. That said, it's sort of come to a point where the crisis is big enough. And, and Anthony is a friend of ours. So we talk about this with him from time to time. And sometimes I ask, like, hey, do you think maybe we should do something different that's not legal? And how much would that help? So that's coming down off the shelf as well. But basically, we look for specifically things where the problem is already solved. So there's something to hijack. Then secondly, looking for things where access is highly blocked. I got a letter at one point where somebody said, I want to make paracetamol. And I was like, you can get that in any store in the world. Like, there is no nation, however repressive, that would ever not let you have that, despite the fact that it's terrible for your liver and it's a really easy way to kill yourself. Nobody blocks that. And they were like, well, yes, but I want to be independent. And I was like, well, cool. Call me if you figure that out. So we're looking specifically for things where access is difficult, where it is something that specifically is provocative in the political arena, things where we're making a statement saying, like, you should be giving people medicine, and it is criminal that you don't. And trying to find things where the risk of not having it's very high, typically. So those are all things where if you don't have them, bad things happen very quickly. So that said, in terms of drug classes, we don't really specialize necessarily. We just try and look for what's needed and what's possible. We were fairly resource poor to begin with, in terms of expertise. Even just number of people was very small. The capabilities were fairly limited, so the methodologies that we had at our disposal were also fairly limited. Most of what I did for the collective for the first, maybe 5-6 years was trying to recruit. because it's a very special overlap of finding people who have both this expertise and also the political sensibility to say, like, I don't mind risking my career to try and make things better for people in a way that operates outside of traditional systems. Most of what we do is internal now. I tried to collaborate with a number of groups over the years that were affiliated with universities, labs, but it usually didn't last very long once they kind of figured out what I was trying to do. I had a lot of very discouraging conversations where I would sort of trade on the fact that I was kind of an academic and say, oh, hi, I'm in town. My name is Dr. Laufer, and I'm in mathematics, and I just have some chemistry questions. I was curious if maybe we could have coffee, and I just need a little help on XYZ problem. And somebody would come out and meet with me, and I'd start asking some questions, and then they'd get this weird look on their face when I would say, yes, but like, how would you do this outside of a lab setting? And they'd look at me and be like, why would you ever do this outside of a lab setting? I was like, well, if you don't have a lab. And they're like, right, but why would you ever do this outside of a lab setting? And then finally I'd kind of be like, well, this is a useful medicine, and not everybody has access, and the number of people who would just stand up and walk out, and often the conversation would take this very weird turn where they'd be explaining some chemical process to me, and they'd say, oh yeah, you can do this. It's not that hard. You can do this and this and this. And I'd say, okay, cool, but like this step, how would you do it without a lab setup? And they'd be like, well, why would you do that without a lab setup? I mean, I guess you could. I mean, you could put it in like a big bottle and shake it a bunch, but like, what a pain. Why would you do that? And then I'd explain this, and they'd be like, actually, this is extremely dangerous, and you should not ever try this, and I'm going to leave. And I remember one guy in particular, I said, well, okay, but if I run into more questions, can I write to you? He's like, no, don't ever contact me again. And if you ever tell anybody we had this conversation, I will deny it happened. I mean, it was like, and that was not like an isolated event. This happened a lot. And it was super weird and and even to the point where it happened fairly recently with a lab that, like, I won't name, so I'm not being a jerk, but they were heavily involved with the street drug checking world, like the harm reductionists who try and set up like somebody who comes in with a baggie of they don't know what, and like, how do you test this? And so I worked with one of their chemists for quite some time, a graduate student there who was running this project, and she had made this just wonderful technology. It was so great. It's like a postcard that has a bunch of lanes in it, these little chemical channels. And you take a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of mystery powder and you kind of grind it across, and you just put it in a glass with water in the bottom. You let the water wick up and it will react. And you can look at the set of colors and you know what's in your drugs. Excuse me. And I said, we're importing what we think are abortion drugs in bulk from overseas. We'd like to give people a tool so that they can order these drugs and know if what they got in the mail is just like some white powder or actually what they think they bought. And she was like, oh yeah, that shouldn't be too hard. Let's try some stuff. And we ordered some things and we worked on it for a while. And we were really close to being done. And it was great. This was a thing that was going to test mifepristone and misoprostol, which are the two main abortion drugs. And because misoprostol is a hormone structure, and we had gotten a good read on that, I was like, hey, could we also get this to test estradiol and testosterone? And we'd gotten most of the way to test this, and it seemed like it was going to work, and I was very excited. And then she graduated. And she's like, don't worry. You can just work with the other people in my lab. As it had turned out, she, I guess, didn't discuss it much with the other people in her lab. And so when she sort of handed it off and I talked to them, they immediately were like, yeah, we don't want to talk to you, like, ever, like, don't call us. And I said, you have 2.5 years of our research, like, sitting in your lab, like, can you just send me some of it? And they're like, no, we're not giving you anything. This is not safe. We don't, and it was the most bizarre thing to suddenly see this. And then I got this very, very threatening email from the primary investigator in the lab saying, like, do not contact my students ever again. Like, it was patently bizarre. So again, I haven't been doing that much. So most of it is people who are internal who've just decided to abandon academia for whatever reason and decided that this is more fulfilling work. I do a lot just to try and get it so people know we exist. Like you said, you'd not heard of us until last week or something. So, I do a lot of sort of goofy publicity stunts in an attempt to sort of draw attention where, the collective itself doesn't distribute drugs. We distribute information, which allows it a certain amount of legal immunity, at least in theory. I personally will sometimes hand out drugs at a conference or throw them from stage or hand them out on a street corner to try and make a fuss, so that we can have a little more press and maybe a few more people will learn about what we do. But it's a big problem, and part of what contributes to that problem is that from the very beginning, we were very clear that we wanted to make sure that we weren't pushing our ideology. We didn't want to come in and say, you should be making your own medicines. We wanted to say, you could be making your own medicines, which is a very different statement. And so a lot of times, certain well-meaning people have come and said, oh, well, you know what you could do that would be, great in terms of marketing and people would be interested. And we've had to be like, no. That's not the idea. We're not trying to just supplant one pipeline and become a different pipeline. The goal is to show people that there are options and to say, here is an option, and make up your own mind. Maybe you think this is a terrible idea, or maybe it's just not for you, or maybe it's great and it's exactly what you need. If no one uses it, it doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing. If one person uses it, then cool. If I die tomorrow, great. And I don't have to know that to be satisfied with the work. But that's not how the common discourse typically goes. That said, I have been told that people have used our technologies and have only ever heard successes, which is pretty strong in terms of the data. Now, that doesn't mean that it's never failed, but nobody's ever reached out and said, we did this and it didn't work. But yes, I have heard from a non-zero number of people on various different projects that they have successfully utilized things, and it's really heartwarming too, right? It's just emotionally, it's really hard not to go looking for those stories. It feels, I'm human, it feels good to know that somebody lived because of something you created. It's really nice to know that somebody solved a medical problem because of something that you found or hijacked. And so to not have that and just kind of like wonder and hope, it's kind of it's an isolating kind of lonely feeling a lot of the time. So those occasions when somebody does say something is very nice. There's trying to think if there are any stories that I can. I think there's one story that I can tell, and I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" And this was the first time I'd heard anything like this ever. I was just absolutely blown away. I was like, "This can't be real." And he said, "No. He saw a guy actually using it, and he sat down with him to make sure that he was okay." After 15 minutes had passed, that his autoimmune reaction came down, and I was like. And I kind of didn't quite believe him. And so I kind of looked at him and I said, okay, just, if it was an EpiPencil, how did your friend know that that's what it was? Because if you've seen it, right, it's this off-the-shelf auto-injector. It looks kind of generic. You just drop a syringe in it. There's not much to it. And he said, oh, the guy had printed out the label that you created and the label was on the thing. I said, fuck off. I don't believe you. He's like, no. The guy had the label on it, had your logo. And I just, it was an amazing, amazing moment. I went home just feeling elated to think that, somebody was having some sort of allergic reaction that could have stopped them from breathing, or in a best case scenario would have cost them thousands of dollars in the US to have a med tech show up, and that, if I had never heard another story and I just had the one, I still feel pretty good about that. That said, it's entirely possible that I may have heard other stories about successful uses of our drugs, which, feels good every time. Feels good every time if it had happened. But it's this very delicate back and forth to try and, also you'd like to know if it's failing, right? If there were something wrong with it and somebody can come back and say, oh gosh, it kind of worked, but there's this other problem, it'd be nice to know. So it's this very delicate balance, and it's another gray area that we work very hard to navigate carefully. So as an example, here in Sweden, you have a set of laws called personal use exemptions, where if we all sit around and just build something for us that violates somebody's patent, but we're not selling it or distributing it in large volume, it's nobody's fucking business, and we can just do it, which I think makes perfect sense, and they should have that everywhere. In the US, if you are in a lab replicating somebody's research for a patent for purely research purposes, and you do not get that licensed, you are in violation and you can be sued. Similarly, the question of what constitutes practicing medicine, or what constitutes a medicine. So the United States has this very bizarre legal system where there's a federal system and there are local systems within each state. So things vary between states as well, which is super weird. In the state of New York, if you said to me, Michael, I kind of have a headache, and I said, you thought about taking an aspirin for that? I am technically committing a felony, and I am practicing medicine without a license because I am offering you medical advice, and I can go to prison for years for that. Now, is it usually prosecuted? No, but it means that there's this stranglehold so that if somebody is doing something that's in a gray area, if they want to go after you, it's very, very easy. It's not terribly complex. And it's old technology. There's a class of tools that are used by chemists these days that are just automated chemical reactors. And you have a sort of vessel where the reaction happens, and you have something that stirs, and you have something that maintains the temperature, and you have things that add ingredients at specific times. Most chemistry is just those three things. It'll say start with this much of this in the solvent, add this, stir at this temperature for this long, then add this much, stir at this temperature for this long. And so the way it works is that you have two jars, and one sits inside the other. You have a little 3D printed armature that holds it. Through the center, you have a spindle that comes down, and you have this sort of paddle that's Teflon coated, and there's a motor that runs it, and that spins. And then you have, between the inner jar and the outer jar, you have a fluid that's circulating. And outside the fluid, it circulates out to another jar that has a heating element. And then you have a temperature probe here. And then you have these sort of pumps that then empty out into the reaction vessel. And so then there's a little microcontroller that sort of talks you through the process, and it says, okay, do you have this and this and this and this? Okay, cool. Put this one in the reaction vessel. Put this in the syringe pumps that will eventually go in. Now, do you have 12 hours that are uninterrupted that you can do this? Yes. Okay. It starts stirring, and it says, all right, bring the temperature up to XYZ temperature, and it will continue to adjust the temperature of the fluid until the inner chamber is up to temperature. And this says adding reagent A, and then it dumps one of the pumps in and says, okay, cool. Now adjusting the temperature to this, going to be stirring for 3 hours. And then it will have a little countdown clock. It'll talk you through it. And it keeps doing this. And in, the instances where you have to intervene as a human, where it says, okay, now you should have a precipitate at the top, pour it through a coffee filter, and then dump it in here. It, again, it's a little screen. It'll talk you through it. But the things that are easy for a machine to do and very easy for a human to screw up because they're boring and long, you stir something for 3 hours and make sure it stays at a very strict temperature, very easy for a computer to do, and you can just sort of leave it and come back and check on it every so often. So that's roughly how that works. Additionally, there's sort of supporting software where if you have a recipe for making a particular chemical, it's a graphical user interface where you can input the steps, graphically, as opposed to having to write code to tell the microcontroller what to do. And so this will convert it to code and say, okay, so step one is, ask if you have these things. Step two is bring it to this temperature, stir for this long. Step three is, and down the line. And then you say go, and it will convert it to code that the machine will then run. You can just load it. Antecedent to that, we have an online tool that will help you find or develop a recipe for a given target molecule. And what it will do is it will crawl through all of the chemical literature that's ever been published and look to see if there's a reaction for the molecule that you want. And what it will do is it will work within whatever parameters you give it. So if you say, look, I only want to work with chemicals that are commercially available, then it will restrict its search space for that. If you say, I only want to work with chemicals that are below a certain price, it will do that. Additionally, you can have it look outside of your parameters, and maybe you'll say, okay, so this one is not commercially available. You can repeat the process and say, now I want to make this one, and then it will give you a process for making the one that you can't get. On top of that, if it does not find something published in the literature, it will connect the dots and say, oh, well, this part of the reaction from this one and this part of the reaction from this one, and it'll connect. And if that's not available, you can push it a little further and use a machine learning algorithm that's embedded within it because it's read all of this literature and say, make a guess. And of course, like any machine learning algorithm, sometimes it goes way off the rails and tells you some garbage. But the type of research to like develop a new synthesis pathway is the sort of thing that historically you would need like a team of really good organic chemists who are extremely experienced to be able to develop, and it would take months. And with this tool, if you have like a chemist, like one who's just competent, and they use this tool, they'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly because they'll look at what the computer gives them and be like, okay, that's not going to work. That's not. Maybe we could try this. That one, oh, that's interesting. So we're trying to go all the way from like, I want this molecule to like, now I have this molecule. And so that's sort of the chain of tools. Yeah. And then lastly, we have a tool that we have not made yet, but we're trying to develop a research assistant that will actually talk you through trying to identify what molecule you might want. So if you say something like, oh, you know, I have this ailment, I have this blood disease, I have this gastrointestinal problem, I'm looking for a medicine that might be useful for this. We don't want it to be that it's like, oh, our recipes are the ones that people trust. It's like there should be an ecosystem out there and people are like teaching each other and trying things and figuring stuff out. That said, getting to that point is hard because people tend not to trust themselves. And, you know, I think chemistry is this scary thing that like only people in universities do. And what if I get it wrong? And like, of course, there are reasons why those aren't things you should be scared of. But, you know, everything in society has conditioned us to think that we shouldn't trust ourselves. And so it's you know, I empathize. It's a very hard hurdle to get over, to, you know, I mean, to sit down and make a drug and then take it, it takes a little bit of grit, in the current environment. But again, it's like people brew beer all the time, and all the various things that could grow in your beer that will make you very, very sick if you get it wrong. Like, people don't seem to be super nervous about that. I mean, why? Well, beer's old technology. You know, it's sort of socially normalized. Tell me which is, you know, or, you know, just making kimchi or sauerkraut. Like, yeah, you do that wrong, all sorts of stuff will grow on it and make you sick. But that's just thought of as normal. That's okay. And that's way more dangerous because you're dealing with biological organisms. You're not even making small molecule chemistry. You sit down and, you know, just make some chemicals. Kind of not a big deal, but creating enough of a social shift that people realize that it's not a big deal. It's a long road. It's going to be a while, I fear. Unless we have a shortcut. Let me know if you think of something. If you go to the hospital and they give you the wrong medication, nobody's jumping up and down saying, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you check? the system worked the way it should and it just fails sometimes. That's just acceptable, that's okay. But if you made your own medicine and it didn't go, they'd be like, you dumb fuck. You should have known better. You should have used the system. You shouldn't be trusting yourself. And that's the reverse of what we should be thinking. It's very sad to me that that's the world that's been built that we have to live in. Because it should really be the reverse, you know. And weirdly, it's you know, we've developed societally, we've developed a lot of sophistication around other things where it's not strange to ask at the grocery store where the vegetables come from. It's not strange to be in a restaurant and ask what the ingredients in your food are. But go ahead and ask a pharmacist about which buffer and which binder is in the pill that they just handed to you, and they're gonna look at you like you're out of your mind. Nobody asks that, and it's like not really an acceptable question. And similarly, that outsourcing of responsibility is so normalized that, again, societally, we've developed a sensibility that outsourcing of responsibility is not acceptable in some cases. Pyrimethamine, this drug that skyrocketed in price, the company that was running it was Turing Pharmaceuticals, and it was run by the guy Martin Shkreli. And he was, you know, there was this controversy around him. And my very first talk, I called him from stage just to be like, you know, do this sort of hacker thing, you know, make it fun. And he didn't answer the phone, but I left him a message. And like 4 hours later, he called me back. And I was not expecting it at all. And I was walking around in the lobby of this hacker conference, and my phone rings, and it says Martin Shkreli on my phone, and I was like, because I had it saved, and you know, because hello, and it was a little awkward at first, but we actually had kind of a nice chat. It was a little weird, right? You have a guy who's like, so what can I do for you? And then for me to basically be like, yeah, I'm trying to hijack your industry. I didn't quite put it that way, but I said, oh, you know, we've built this device. We're trying to make small scale manufacturing of pharmaceuticals available to individuals. And he goes, huh, that's a pretty cool idea. I think that best use case for this will probably be where you have somebody who's got a little bit more pharmaceutical knowledge and maybe a little knowledge of organic chemistry will be serving a small community. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, yeah, okay, well, you know, nice talking to you, keep in touch. And in fact, you know, I might be interested in funding your project. I shit you not. He said this. And I like nearly fell over it. I said, oh, great, yeah, no, like give me an email address and I'll send you some stuff. And he did, and I did. And then he was in prison shortly thereafter. So the conversation didn't go much further. I wrote to him in prison, and he didn't write back. And he's out of prison now. I haven't tried to contact him since. But there's a funny story that I haven't told before in a public forum. So we're here on the train to Copenhagen. We just left Gothenburg, and we're going to be crossing the border between Sweden and Denmark soon. It's been an intense trip. Most places it seems like we arrive the same day that we need to prepare and give a talk. So things have been intense, but we've been meeting with a lot of good groups, making a lot of new friends, starting a bunch of new projects. I think a lot of good things are going to come out of the trip, but the traveling has been intense. So we're going to continue to be on this train for another 2.5 hours or so, and then we'll roll into Copenhagen and see what the scene is there. So see you there.
Mike, we need y'all. My style goes down.
I'm standing here in front of the Youth House. This is a historic place in the history of anarchism and punk in all of Scandinavia. This is in Denmark, in Copenhagen. This is the last stop on our tour. We've seen a lot of really fascinating places where people have had aggression against them. They've had their places burned down. They've been kicked out. And this place is no different. It has a really fascinating history. So we're about to head upstairs to a space where their pirate radio station used to be and talk with some of their members specifically about the history of this space and why it's significant in the movement and the history of anarchism specifically in Scandinavia. Let's go inside. The basic thing if you're trying to make your own medicine is that you're trying to bypass whatever is stopping you, which is always the weird thing. And in countries which are resource rich, it's really bizarre when you have the medicine sitting on the shelf and simultaneously, for some reason, you don't have access. And the three reasons usually are either because of price, because of intellectual property law, or because somebody has some bizarre reason to pass a law saying you can't have medicine that's usually rooted in religious beliefs, or in some cases where it's not a resource-rich country, then you're just lacking the infrastructure. The medicine just isn't there. There isn't a way to get it there. The easiest, like old-school way is you just get the medicine elsewhere, you smuggle it into where you need it, and then you can distribute it, and that's fine. Then you can go through the spectrum and adjust your technique based on what you do have access to, what you don't have access to, and how resource rich or poor you are. Another way to do it is you get the raw ingredients, the raw materials. You have a small setup that allows you to do compounding. All you have to do is smuggle in those ingredients, and then you have your system set up and you can do the compounding on site. The third option, which is the hardest but also the most robust, is that what you can do is you can synthesize it from scratch on site. However, that requires the most work. It requires the most in terms of tools that you have to set up, but you only have to set those up one time, as opposed to smuggling, which you have to do every time, or compounding, where you have to do it regularly. So there's this sort of spectrum of techniques that you can do if you're trying to bring medicines into a community where they aren't available. And yet it is so strange when you think about the fact that so much money and so much time and so many talented people spend so much energy developing all of these amazing medicines that can fix so many things, and yet we're not allowed to have them most of the time without permission, which is such a strange phenomenon. The model of oppression that I think of, that I think is not explored enough, is that we think about resource control. That's the first thing, right? Who has access to our medicines? Who has access to, who can cut off our water or our power, our electricity, or our connectivity, our communications? But if we think back a step, previous to that, you have to ask, why are they able to do that? And in most cases, the reason that that is available to one group is because they have information that they have kept separate from the public information. And the reason that that is possible is because there's this commodification of information all of a sudden. And this has its roots in intellectual property law and in the school system, where you see like, oh, you can learn that, like, but maybe later. maybe in the next class, or maybe if you major in this, or maybe in graduate school, but that's not for you now. And the only thing that allows that to be possible is that at the very origin, there's a shrouding of conceptual understanding. When you explore a concept or any idea with a conceptual basis, then you have a means of generating information, and no longer do you have to know the trick. If there is a medical problem that you are trying to solve, first off, feel free to write to me. I might know a trick because I know a lot of tricks, but don't depend on that. You don't need 4 thieves. We're here to kind of show that it's possible and share our tricks, but they're not our tricks. They're everybody's tricks, and there are way more tricks out there than we'll ever find, no matter how hard and long we work, because the thing to remember is that any medicine that you want, it's made somewhere by a person. And that person is not a whole lot different than you are. If you dig for these, though, you can find them. Sometimes things get approved, but just not for the thing that you would think that they're effective for. And my favorite example of this is Viagra, which is a medicine so popular that everybody knows it. And the thing that it is so very effective for that almost nobody knows is that it is a miracle cure for menstrual cramps. Here's what happened. It was supposed to be a heart medication. They had 2 cohorts. They had a male cohort, they had a female cohort. They came in, they said, you all have heart problems, take this medication, come back. It wasn't working as a heart medication. And the female cohort came back and said, none of us have menstrual cramps anymore. And they were like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then the male cohort came back and were like, you know what? And they were like, the female cohort is excused, thank you. And that information just sits in a journal somewhere and nobody fucking knows about it. And when finally somebody dug it up and said, what is wrong with you? It is irresponsible that you do not allow this to be prescribed for menstrual cramps. They were like, it had the side effect of giving women headaches, so it wasn't useful. And some hardcore researchers who had almost no funding decided that they were going to do a clinical trial with this anyway. And they found out that there is a way that you can utilize Viagra more effectively for menstrual cramps and not get headaches. And it's very simple. Instead of taking it orally, you take it vaginally. And it works more effectively. It's closer to the vasculature that you're trying to affect, and it doesn't have to pass a first-round liver metabolism, which gives you the secondary metabolites that give you the headaches in the first place. So if you happen to know anybody who might suffer from menstrual cramps, 100 milligrams of Viagra in the front door and gone. And there's I like this example because it's kind of it's easy to get angry and laugh at the same time because it's so ridiculous. But there are tens of thousands of these if you go and look. If you or somebody that you care about is suffering from something and there's not a treatment for it, go check. Go check the research, because there might be something that just didn't get past the chemistry bench. There's a lot out there. This is a very important question, and we're working on a tool to make it slightly easier. But currently, the first thing to do is you want to search scientific journals specifically, right? So you use one of the search engines that looks specifically in Google Scholar or and then eventually you port over to Sci-Hub so that you can get it. And what you want to do is you want to find the sort of scientific name for whatever the ailment is, right? It'll probably be Latin or some gobbledygook. And then you use that as your search term. And then once you find one paper that's related to what you want, you scroll to the bottom and you look through all of their references and then you read all of those. And then you sort of iterate this process. And and there's this wonderful branching tree that happens, and like most of it will be useless. But the gem that you're looking for is probably there, and you just need to dig through all of it. There are other tools out there. There are ones that will also see, don't worry, I'll get you, that will not just look at all of the references that paper refers to, but if that paper is old, it will also look forward and say which papers reference the paper that you're reading. And so you can see the branches upward as well as the branches downward. Yeah, really, really great tool. And you'll find things that sit in different spaces. Sometimes it's like one chemist did this in a petri dish once and it kind of worked. Or somebody did this with rats and maybe there's a way to convert. If you do that, there's like an extra, if they're in those early stages, you have to take some extra steps for how to convert sort of more abstract research into something that you can take yourself. We did a talk about that in Prague a few years ago. It's on our website. It's called like N=1 real-time adaptive trials. And then if you see one where they started clinical trials, then they've done the hard work for you. The dosage is there, the preparation is there, the route of administration is there, and you just steal it. Yeah, I mean, depending on how punk rock you feel, right? Like it's you can start if you're nervous about it, you can start at lower dosages and work your way up. And there's a very specific protocol for how you do that safely. And this is the same thing that you would do if there wasn't an animal trial, if there wasn't a human trial. You start with the highest possible dose before there are any effects. And you take that, and you will probably feel nothing. And then you double it. And then you will probably feel nothing. And then you multiply that times 1.5. And then you multiply that times 1.3. And then you multiply that times 1.32. And then you iterate that process until something happens or you decide this isn't working. Again, we detailed this, but there's a way that you can go through with something that's unknown so that you're not going to dive in and poison yourself. If it turns out to be too toxic, you'll know way before you get into the danger zone. We were asked to talk about is supporting comrades in war zones overseas. And interestingly enough, this is something that we've thought about a lot. War zones are strange, and they operate in ways that are very counterintuitive. I put this slide up because everybody knows Anne Frank. But if you go through and ask the questions, do you know when she died? Do you know where she died? And you know how she died? Oftentimes, people will get it wrong. She died in late February or early March of 1946. It was in Bergen-Belsen, and she died of typhus. Now, yes, it was still a mechanism of the fact that she was in a concentration camp that is why she died. But nobody executed her directly. This was a secondary effect. And the weird thing to think about is if you look at war zones, the main thing that kills people is not bombs or bullets or any other form of violence. It is chronic, non-infectious disease. The main things that you see people die from are heart failure, kidney failure, and diabetes. You get this to your comrades in war zones, you're going to save lives. Now, this is not what the combatants need, but this is what people need if you're trying to save people. Death tolls go up roughly 34% when there's a war. In non-combatants, that's where most of the deaths are. Now, yes, of course, combatant deaths are a few percent, but it's a few percent. Most of the casualties of war are totally uncounted. And it is because of interruption of infrastructure and people can't get their medicines. This is a wonderful quote, but I think it's often misunderstood, especially with people who raise an eyebrow when things are genetically modifying, saying that's not life. But you know what? It is, because we're life, and we found a way, and we will always find a way, and we will find more ways, and we will keep doing it. And I, for one, am never going to apologize for it, because I want everybody to have all the medicines they want, and I want everybody to be healthier, and I want people to have access to whatever they think is best for their body without having to ask anybody permission ever. So, with that, I will leave you with a very American thing. These were stickers that we had printed up a long time ago, and I think that it's time that we make new stickers, because there is an even more American aphorism that is related to the same thing, which I think is appropriate. So we're here in Denmark, super excited to be with some people who have been so kind as to host us in their space. We're actually in their old pirate radio station. Downstairs there's a show happening that we just opened for, which was super exciting, and we're going to learn a little bit about the history of the space. So if you'd start us off, tell us a little bit about where we are.
We are at Ungdomshuset, which translates to the youth house. It is a punk house in Copenhagen that we have had for almost 15 years. Before that, we had another house, also called Ungdomshuset, that got evicted, and then we fought very hard and got this new space.
So tell us about how we got the new space.
Well, the old space actually used to be a people's palace from the late 19th century. Apparently, Clara Zetkin founded the International Women's Workers' Day there, the 15th of March. And it, as the labor movement got weaker, it kind of got abandoned and given over to the municipality. And then in 1982, there was what's called the second wave of occupation, like political occupations in Copenhagen. The first one were called the Slum Stormers, and Christiania is a survivor of that,
right.
Has been holding on ever since.
Wonderful history there.
Absolutely. And linked movements, definitely. And then in 1982, squatters would occupy this old space on Jagtvej 69, and made it into an autonomous space for decades. But then, unfortunately, in 2007, that space got evicted.
So tell me a little bit about that eviction process.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I can go for that. So I was part of that eviction process as well. So the house was sold to a foundation that was later turned over to be a Christian sect, like hardcore Christian people, and they wanted us gone, no matter how many people got hurt, and the police and the politicians were, they wanted that as well. So there was a long tension for years with trials and peaceful demonstrations, and a lot of activism, trying to keep the house peacefully. And then in 2006, the final straw was in the courthouse that said we had to be evicted. And then we just waited, basically, and prepared for the eviction that everybody knew would happen. And then that was in March of 1st of March 2007.
And how nasty was that? Was that a violent process, or?
So I was woken up by a police helicopter. I lived right next door. Actually, it was a military helicopter that dropped special forces down on the roof. They also had police in a container that was lifted up through a crane, and then they blew in some of the wall, and then they tear gassed every floor, and they also used this foam you use to put out fires just to pacify everybody, and they filled every room with that shit. I wasn't in the house. I was waking up just outside the house and was too late because, well, it was crawling with police all around. Ran down and felt like, well, now we just gotta try to get back in the house. So there was a lot of waves trying to storm back and forth into the house. A lot of people got hurt. A lot of people got arrested. And
how long did that take? Was that how many hours?
Well, this started in like 6 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And it never stopped for days.
So like 100 hours?
Continuous riots for, I would say, 3 days, yes. There were a lot of things going on, but it was not only around the house, because this had not just become this was now a movement and not just a fight for this one place. This was like, they are trying to kill the culture around this place. And that was so devastating to all of Copenhagen, because this was not just a place for punk music and People's Kitchen. It was also like a symbol of like the underground movement as a whole. So that was so devastating. So there was not just riots one place. There was riots all over Copenhagen, and that was just the first 3 days, I would say. Then the organization went to, okay, what are we going to do to get a new house? So it was decided that we would have one demonstration each week at Thursday at 5 p.m. And that kept going. I can't remember for how many demonstrations, but I think it was 70 weeks straight. Some of them were quite peaceful. Some of them were quite violent, either of our choosing or by the police choosing. Most often the latter. So there was a lot of violence, and there were so many different kinds of demonstrations. There were a lot of occupations, a lot of them. Also, especially one where we had 10,000 people trying to take this space called Grøndalsvinge Allé, or G13. And that was, I don't think there's ever been thrown so much tear gas in the Danish history. That was wild. That specific demonstration, because they saw that so many people wanted a new space, was actually the catalyst that gave us, what do you call it?
Means of negotiation?
Means of negotiation, thank you.
Or leverage. Yeah.
Leverage, exactly. To negotiate with the municipality, who then eventually, when we kind of threatened to do the same thing against the municipality that we just did with that house, then they gave us this house. And
so do you have a theory, or do you have any information about who it was or what group it was that pushed that agenda to say, we need to shut this down, we need for this to stop? And what was it that sort of allowed for that decision to be okay in sort of the common social space?
Well, I think a lot of the way it wasn't. I think like a vast majority of like random citizens was like, why are you doing this again? Mm-hmm. Like, this seems unnecessary. The youth house was not just a space for like the activists. A lot of people came to the youth house or played concerts there or just came by when they were drunk. And so we also brought like a lot of people knew about it or had some sort of memory or connection to it.
It's a safe space.
Yeah. Or like, maybe your kids used to go there, or one time your band when you were in high school played there, or like there's like most people in Copenhagen had some sort of memory with it.
A cultural touchstone.
Yes. And then also like it was my comrade was talking about, it's like a historically significant building.
Right.
And in Denmark, we have a thing like we don't tear down significant buildings. We try to keep them. And so a lot of people were also like angry about that. And also because in the beginning it was mostly peaceful, like the activism that was done for keeping the house was very peaceful, and I think that brought a lot of people. There was also like unlimited amounts of different kinds of activism that was done to keep it. There was people who went out to schools and talked with students and was like, hey, this is happening. This is not cool.
Wow.
If you disagree with this, come join us. There was theaters, there was concerts, there was soup kitchens. Quite a few different famous Danish artists made like a song together about saving the youth house, and like it was very. Everybody kind of agreed that it was nice, and then I think we kind of lost some of that momentum when the riots started turning sour, and then people were like, well, you maybe shouldn't throw rocks.
Right. There's always those people who are a little shy when things get messy. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I think the general population of Denmark liked the concept of it, also because like having a bunch of punks loose in the city is not very nice. It's nicer to just like, they have their space and then
just let's set them aside and it'll be fine, right? It's a different energy when you let everybody off the leash.
Yeah, because then like after they evicted the house, you just ended up having a lot of punks angry around the city.
Yeah.
And that was not very favorable.
Probably not. So do you have a theory of any sort as to, considering the fact that clearly this was an error and that the majority of the population saw it as such, what was the thing that started it? Who was it, or what was it? Or is it still a mystery as to who it was who signed the form or stamped the order to let something like that happen?
I mean, I can venture some guesses, and correct me if I'm veering off course, but I think there was a large political change actually after the 9/11 attacks. I mean, the whole world was paying attention to that, and the far right in Denmark, what's called the Danish People's Party, which is, I guess you would call it a right populist party.
Yeah.
They were able to capitalize on this and were weighing heavier in the political landscape. We don't have a winner-takes-all system of elections. We have coalition governments.
Right.
So any ruling party will have to compose with smaller parties, and they suddenly had a lot more weight.
Yeah.
And I think that put on the agenda the will to normalize these marginals. And then I think
Did that set the stage for other raids against other marginalized populations?
Well, we spoke of Christiania earlier, and definitely that also, there was a political will to normalize Christiania, which is prime real estate.
Kind of happened, yeah?
Yes, but it's still there.
It's still there, which like warms my heart so much. Like I remember seeing Christiania when I was in graduate school here, and I just wandered in by chance. I thought, what is going on? I was so happy, and so I'm really glad that it's still alive.
It's been an ongoing negotiation, and with recent developments too, they were just allowed to actually buy back the land.
But they only bought back part of it, right? They didn't get all of it?
As long as they accepted some social housing on the ground, and the city authorities have said that their attitude towards letting the community have a say in who gets to live in those social housing, that they fit in with the specific social character of the space. There should be some common decision there. But we'll see how that develops, and that can also change depending on who's in power when.
Right, but that's really promising. Again, so hopeful. Or I'm hopeful.
Yeah, but, I mean, I think if we weren't a bit utopian, all of us, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing, right?
Sure, of course.
I think,
Yeah.
we've always got hope, but sometimes I think history has taught us to be wary too. And yeah, I think the will to push the old youth house further out of the center was definitely an intent to gentrify. If you get undesired populations out, then you can replace them with people who have high incomes. You can, you can get more taxes from them, and then you can do more politically because you have more funds, and then you get to pat yourself.
The cycle continues. Yes, of course.
And yeah, but we've actually just buried that mayor last year, this year.
Last year.
Yeah.
Cool. So maybe you can tell us a little more about what's happened since the move. Now that, I mean, and this place is huge. Like, I mean, I've been in some punk houses in my time, and this one you could get lost in.
Yeah, it's I still get lost sometimes, and I've been a part of it for 15 years. But it's
how great, right?
It's amazing. It's
amazing.
Oh, nice.
best pun of the day. But yeah, it's so cool to be able to house so many different events and so many different groups in one house. So we don't have to spread it out. We have so many different things here. We have like a full professional kitchen here. We have 2 concert halls. We have a library. We have a creative area. We have sleeping area for bands.
Thanks for that, by the way.
Yeah. We have a gym. It's really amazing because that makes us able to do a lot of things in the same place and not have to spread it out, and to feel like a community and create a safe space, really.
That's fucking wonderful. I love that. And I think spaces like this are so important, not just for what they do, but what they show to other spaces, saying what's possible. I think that that's really underrated a lot of times when people say, what are you doing to show that it's possible to do things like this, and say, look, you can do it too. Try it. It's hard, but it's worth it.
I mean, there's so much trial and error here, and there's a constant change of generations. It's called the youth house, and that is sometimes very literally what it is. There is a huge new young generation coming in right now, which is absolutely amazing for someone a bit older or one of the activists who have been here longer, to see that there are still people who want to do this, and the young generation, they really want to do stuff, and they want to learn on their own sometimes, and that's a struggle.
Yeah.
But it's also fucking amazing because that's how I wanted to learn back in the day.
And also, you know that they're going to learn things that we haven't learned yet.
Exactly.
You know? We're gonna get new stuff, and that's always important to have a good turnover and trust that the new blood's gonna figure some shit out.
Exactly. It's so important.
Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about some dreams for what's next.
Well, like practically for the house, we're working towards.
We're getting an extension. Right?
Yeah, right. So this floor that we're on right now is mostly just band rehearsal rooms, and we're working on getting those moved out to some containers out in the yard. It's a long process, but we're working on it. And so that kind of leaves us with an entire floor to figure out what we want to do with. And so we've been talking about having a cinema. There's also everybody has some sort of idea about what they want up here. I'm on the cinema boat. I think it'd be fucking cool.
Well, if you have a cinema, I think we might have something we can send you to watch.
Yeah, and then I think kind of like getting back on our feet after COVID. Like we usually have like a people leave, people come kind of vibe, but it's always kind of stable. There's always kind of like it evens out in the end kind of vibe. But then COVID came and a lot of people left, or well,
Of course.
COVID, and no one came in because the house was closed. We went into lockdown during COVID, and so as new people, they couldn't really come in. And so we're still working on getting on our feet from that. But I'm optimistic. I think it kind of felt like being in a slum for a while after COVID, but I'm seeing the table starting to turn, and that's really fucking exciting.
Cool. Yeah, good. Let me know if you decide to build a hospital.
I mean, no joke. I mean, there's gonna be space, and it's gonna be what people make of it.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
And for example, we have the maker space, like our Fab Lab. That's because people saw an empty space and were like, we want to do something with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe.
If that happens, you know,
sure.
call me. I know some people.
Yeah, bring in the biopunks. For
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, forever. Well, thank you guys so much for doing this. Thanks so much for having us. And I hope we come back.
Yeah, feel so welcome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anytime.
All right, great. Well, thanks again so much. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Okay.
See ya. Safe trip.
So I want to talk a bit about the action that was called G13. That was the squad action that we tried to do to get the house we're in now. It ended up being 10,000 people trying to squat a place.
10,000?
10,000 people. So at least. And I was part of a group within a group, I guess. We were called the sabotage group.
Good name.
Good, very. It was also very literally because we had to the function we had was to open up the house or the houses, because it was like a mini version of Christiania out there with like how the layout of the houses out there with grass in between and stuff. So it's multiple houses. Anyway, we were out there cutting fences. We were out there making sure that the police and the guards out there didn't put up blockades on the windows so we could get into the houses. And we did this months in advance with a constant cat and mouse fight between us and the police. So at some point we figured out that there were going to be 4 blocks in this demonstration that went out to the place, and each block had to go through a different route and a different tactic to get in. One of the tactics involved getting in from the side. So just to lay it out, there's a train track running here. We have a very steep hill with trees on it, then a grassy area with a path down it. So we were just so scared that the police could just park 2 police vans and then the whole block would just be flawed. So we were thinking, how do we stop a police car? And we were like, maybe some partisan nails, but we were like, oh, a dog couldn't step on it, so we couldn't do that. So we were like, okay, what do we do then? So we decided to dig a moat. So we dug a moat, actually. We went out there a few days before in the middle of the night. Actually, before that, we measured a police van, how far there was between the tires. So that we couldn't the actual path, we couldn't dig there. It was the concrete or too hard or something. But we figured out the path was too small. It couldn't be on the path. Then we went out and dug like 2 different moats, middle of the night. And I think we were saying, okay, is it deep enough? Are we finished with this project? When we then got spotted by a random police car who were in the area, I guess, that started driving down this park path, so weird, with a flashlight against us, and everybody ran. but and got away. Me and a Greek guy, I don't remember his name even, but we stopped because we were like, we dug a moat. So actually they're not supposed to be able to get past here. And I guess they didn't expect the moat because they drove right into it with their front wheels and they got stuck. And we were, well, mocking them, and then they tried to run after us and we got away. But yeah, and apparently the day after, or 2 days after, the demonstration was there, the block that was supposed to go in there, they said there was no police cars, so it did work. It was fucking amazing.
Beautiful.
And the best part is when instead of covering up the holes with the earth that we put like right next to it, the police chose instead to cut down some of the forest that was right next to to go around instead of just putting the earth back in, like in a perfectly half circle around. Just, it was ridiculous to look at. We got into the house, but they were waiting with us with police dogs and so many riot cops. We got into most of the houses and we didn't hold it for long, but it was a very symbolic thing, and by far the best part of activism I've ever done.
Well, thank you for sharing this story. That's a wonderful win. And I hope we have many more of those to come.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
I'm standing in Christiania, which is the perfect spot for us to end this month-long tour that we've been on. We've been everywhere. It's been so exciting, and we've met so many amazing people. We landed in Qatar, we were in the UK briefly, we've been in Iceland, Sweden, now we're finally in Denmark, and a few other places we shouldn't talk about, but it's been amazing. We've met wonderful people, great connections, and made coalitions with other movements to try and bring autonomous medicine to people. Christiania is a very special place, and it's a perfect place for us to end this tour because it's the longest standing and one of the largest autonomous zones in the world. It's been autonomous for over 50 years, and it's still standing. One of the most amazing places on the planet. So let's take a look at a couple of places. We'll talk about the history a little bit, and we'll cut in some bits and pieces from some of the other places we've been and see some overview of the talks that we had and the spaces that we were lucky enough to be in. So come along and let's go take a look. Christiania has an incredible history. In 1971, this was just a disused army barracks, and a group seized it and declared it a micronation, an autonomous zone. And although there's been a long history of back and forth with the police and there have been raids, the people have always prevailed. And to this day, it's still an autonomous zone that's run entirely by the people who live here. There's also a history with drug usage. Eventually it was decided that this was too dangerous and it was determined that it should be phased out. It was voted on by the group. There is still some, but it has gone down significantly. And it has remained as it has for a very long time, just a beautiful and peaceful place. And I don't know if I've ever seen a better place in my life. It's really wonderful. And if you're ever in Copenhagen, come to Christiania and leave the EU just for a little moment. Come take a look.